Okay, let's dive straight in and use our strategic story cards to break down how Donald Miller uses a lightning-quick origin story to strike up an emotional connection so you could do the same for you and your business. So let's break down this whole whistle-stop origin story. Uncle Don, take it away.
Yeah, well, I had no shot at any form of success. If you took a snapshot of my junior high school years, you would say this kid's going nowhere fast.
So we started off there with what we would call a past persona card, right? So let's remember, for the purposes of this origin story, despite all the StoryBrand stuff, he is the hero. So it helps if you find a hero at the beginning of their journey, very different from how they end up once it's completed, even if the end of that journey is them becoming the guide. So the more different the way you are when you start out is to that end result, the more compelling the story. So dropping a little bit of detail there about how it was very different, like a bit of a dead-end journey as a child, it's a super compelling way to start. Classic. Let's go.
And I had this youth pastor at my local church who said, Don, I'd love for you to write the guest column in this little bitty youth group newsletter. I mean, it was probably 50 people subscribed to it. I wrote it.
Okay, so it's another classic move, right? So in most very, very popular stories, there's this moment of the call to adventure, and that's its own card, right? Often it comes from an outside influence. And this is just, it's such quintessential StoryBrand stuff. A guide appears, your own version of a mentor, and calls you to action, because the classic factor of most heroes is they stay stuck until there's a bit of a nudge. They don't always start their own journey. In fact, it rarely happens in the most popular stories. It's just a classic way to start it. So you have that mentor that's basically pulling him out of whatever road he was on and giving him a chance. And that's all he gives him, a chance, right? It's not like they do it for you. The mentor doesn't say, oh, hey, come on, I'll solve these problems for you. Gives you a chance, gives you a choice. Donald Miller obviously took that choice and he chose to do a bit of writing. So let's see what happens next.
I wrote it, I got great feedback from like 5 people, and I thought, I'm good at one thing, and it's writing. And of course, that was not true at the time, but at least I was delusionally optimistic to think I could hone it into a craft. And I did so.
Okay, so that's a nice touch. There's a bit of humility there. There's this honesty about what's being said. Now, he would have told this story 1,000,000 times, right? Or variations of it. But the trick of the greats is it's a bit like a band. You go and see a band and they're playing the same song on tour every single night. But if you go and hear one for the first time, it's like you're the only one in the room, right? They connect with you. So that little bit of humility does that. The point he's making here is he's discovered what we would call his irrational buzz. So this is a crucial part of an origin story, which is it's where you discover the thing that turns you on. What is the thing? And obviously the simpler it is, the better. The more it's connected to your ultimate business, the better. It's clearly story. That's what turns him on. So let's see where the journey goes next.
So I wrote a bunch of books, and my second book was called Blue Like Jazz, and it stayed on the New York Times bestsellers list for like 42 weeks, if you can believe it. Now, I just fast forwarded 15 years.
So as he says there, that was a real fast move through a lot of stuff that usually would be dug into. And I've heard much more about this elsewhere from him. But that's what we would call the quantum leap, right? You're doing this thing, it's going okay, and then suddenly, whoosh. So he's kind of glossed over the fact that is would be mind-blowing to most people when it happens, which is, oh, you get a bestseller, you get a New York Times bestseller, and he's like brushed over it like it's nothing, which is a bit of a power move, but that's fine. Nonetheless, it's a moment where it's like it's just so fast and so far beyond where you were that it's worthy of mention. And flipping heck, that's its own story. How does it feel at the moment you have a New York Times bestseller, having been on the path you were on? It could be its own podcast. Nonetheless, it's a crucial point of this. It goes, and now on to the next bit.
The time that happened, there was a lot of writing in there. And then in order to keep writing books and keep selling books, quite honestly, I studied story and how story works and how story keeps a person turning the pages. And I just became a story junkie. I just read every book I could, took every course I could on story in order to be a better writer. So I kept writing.
So there you go. So every origin story usually has this period of toil, right? You have to learn your craft. We would call that a crucible of learning card. You can't just get called to action, called to adventure, and then be a straight line through. You have to earn some stuff, right? You have to earn that knowledge. And that's the crucible of learning. So he's learning his craft here, he's putting in the hours. And this is so crucial when you are positioning yourself as a guide. You don't want the guides that you see or that are trying to ultimately get you to buy into what they are doing. You don't want to perceive them as having got there quickly or just like read a couple of blogs and suddenly they're trying to sell you something. You want to feel like they've earned it, and this is hinting at that. I think there's much more to this one that he's talked about elsewhere, where he's like really went down the rabbit hole of it. But nonetheless, it's a crucial bit, so let's see what's next.
So I kept writing books, and those books did well. But by about the 7th or 8th memoir, I ran out of things to say.
Okay, so again, he's glossed over something that can be a really important point. We'd call that the waiting place card. And it helps you talk as a founder, business leader, entrepreneur about a time when you got stuck. And it's a nice little point of a story. Again, he's thrown it in there. It could easily be dwelt upon, but like this idea of being stuck. And it's not quite as oblique or over the top as like some incredible challenge, but like there's this feeling of running out of steam. It's so relatable. Now, a lot of people might be hesitant to kind of talk about this area of their journey. It sounds like a bit of a nothingness. Like, why would I talk about a time when I just got stuck? Well, you don't stay there. You don't just talk about that. It's a perfect setup for what comes next. So let's see what he does.
And Accenture, this giant consulting firm, called me and said, Don, we know you know a lot about story. Could you help us figure out how to overlap a project management system and story structure together? In other words, we want to invite United and Continental to merge as an airline. Could you help us figure out how to create a narrative around something like that? And I did.
Okay, so that is what we would call a first flight card. And it's supposed to be a way to get you talking about the moment you first tried out and put into practice a manifestation of all that earned knowledge, all that expertise that you got together during the early part of your origin story, and you applied it in a situation that is similar to the way you are suggesting people buy into you doing it for them now, right? The first application of that. And it's supposed to be exciting, and you could easily, again, extend this whole thing out. The thing that makes that moment really exciting if you're retelling it is a sense of uncertainty. Like, was there a moment where he wasn't sure if it was going to work? Like, he's been asked by a big company to do this. Was there any, doubt in his mind there? Because you think about the moments in films and books where the hero uses their powers for the first time, right? That's what it's supposed to feel like. Standing on the edge of a precipice, you think you can do it, but you're not sure. But look, it's put up or shut up time. You either jump or you're going to go backwards. It's just a great point in a story. It's one of my favorite cards. Usually when, if you were suggesting someone talks about this, want to know how it feels when it goes right. Because that's the moment of exhilaration. And it's kind of like the point at which you can say, oh, well, there's definitely something here. And that becomes the crucial setup for the next point. Let's do it.
And I did. I created a curriculum and then realized really quickly this affects marketing and messaging, and created a curriculum around the way companies can use stories to engage customers, and wrote a book, and it sold 500,000 copies. And now I'm grateful to say somehow that's what I've ended up doing with the last 7-8 years of my life.
Okay, nice one. So that's what we would call the Genesis Spark card. It's the moment at which the business takes shape. That can often be very on the nose of like, you skirt over it and go, and that's how the business was born. Or it could be the point at which you were like, this is what it's going to be. Either way, it's usually something that comes right at the end of an origin story, kind of the cherry on top. You can kind of transition into some stuff about the origin of the business and how it developed. Probably best left separately. And that's where he kind of finishes it off, right? He goes straight into talking about problems and solutions and all this stuff, as you'd expect. He can't get away from this origin story quick enough, but nonetheless, it's done its job. So there we have it, Donald Miller's whistle-stop origin story. Now, you can't pull that off without a level of clarity. He's picked the key moments in his life and he's arranged them so they flow, where they make it seem like there's just really, at that moment, no one you'd rather then hear from about the concept of storytelling in business. So, what could have made that story stronger? Yes, you heard me right, folks. Look, I'm not just some hero-worshipping dunce or random marketing niche tourist doing this for likes. So I am going to jump in here and tell the great Donald Miller, Uncle Don himself, how to make his origin story just a little bit better. And God help me, I think he'd agree with my points if he was going to focus on this one singular aspect of the whole business storytelling puzzle. So first up, there weren't really any high stakes in this story. There was no moment when he was down and out, a moment where he lost everything. We'd call that the breaking point card. Now I know he's had a moment like that because I've heard him talk about it elsewhere. Most great business leaders do. If you're ambitious, you're going to have those hard times. And if you talk about them, it humanizes you. It makes you relatable. The lower the moment, the more devastating, the better. That can lead quite nicely to an impossible challenge, which will be the story of how you got out of that moment. Also, it's really nice to have a clear about face moment in an origin story. A moment where everything you thought kind of gets turned on its head because of your journey, because of the knowledge you have earned. So an example here might be if he added an element of, well, I thought story was just about films and books, purely about art and expression, but there was a moment I realized it had an incredible business application. Now that is kind of in there, but if there's a real reversal of the way you felt about it that was set up along the way, it makes it even more powerful. You can even work backwards from that moment so that everything builds into it. So those are some little suggestions. Nonetheless, this is undoubtedly what we at Story Captain would call a core story. Think of all of these component parts as scenes that you then combine and package together. Boom. That is one of your core stories. It should be one of many. It's something valuable to be crafted and treated with respect.